Hi, it's Alexis Hasselberger, time management and productivity coach. Today, I want to talk about the concept of complexity and specifically unnecessary complexity. I think a lot of times we add unnecessary complexity to our lives, to our systems, to our task systems, to our files, to a lot of things. And we think we're doing it in the name of like organization, right? That by doing so things will be easier for us. And it is maybe more organized when we add these kind of complex structures to things. But does that organization actually serve us? Does that actually move us to where we need to go? Does that help us do the thing that we're trying to do? Oftentimes, no. Right. And so many times when I'm working with people, they come in and they have an impeccably organized task list, right? It has folders and subfolders and tasks and subtasks, and they're wondering why are they struggling to get things done? They have this really, they're using a task list. Like, isn't that what you hear? You got to use a task list, and it's beautifully organized. But the problem is that it doesn't then help you actually do the things, right? It doesn't move it forward. And not only that, but you spend a lot of time organizing it, reorganizing it, moving things around. And then it starts to feel like, well, this task system has, so much overhead and it's not helping me get the things done. So why am I even using it in the first place? And I kind of agree, right? If we're spending more time organizing than we are doing, then we might have a little bit of an imbalance problem and we need to figure that out, right? So when we think about how can we move things forward and what systems we use, we want to think about how can we make it the lowest effort possible, as simple as possible, and then, what can we remove to make it more simple, right? And this is why there are so many task apps and things out there. They have like so many fields and, it just feels like a lot to fill in all these fields. And I agree, we don't need all of that, right? Or this organized task list, like, if you've got things in all of these nice sub buckets, how does that actually help you to move things forward or to get things done? So I want to share with you a few real world examples of how this like over complexity comes up, because this urge to organize, it is high, it is peak, right? So many people feel like if they quote get organized, then they will be more productive, right? That is the first step. And there's certainly maybe a little bit of this that is true, but I think when we think about organization, we are often thinking about something very different than productivity, or maybe we're merging them, but they are not the same thing, right? You can be very organized and still get nothing done, right? And so they're maybe they're tangentially related, but they definitely aren't the same thing. And oftentimes we conflate them as the same thing. And being super organized or adding like all this complexity in this organizational system, it actually often muddies the water, right? It takes time to deal with and it makes things harder to find. And we want to kind of eliminate things. We want to keep it simple. So, what are some examples of how this shows up? I'm going to give you an example of just folks that I've coached and where this has shown up for them. So, I remember several years ago, I was working with a guy, and he was a small business owner, and he had a laptop that he wanted to hand me down to his wife. She needed a new computer. He had a computer that was perfectly fine, and so he wanted to hand me down this one to her. As the person in my relationship who regularly gets hand me down tech, I feel for her, right? That's fine for me, but it's like you want to get it when you need it, right? And so one thing, he said he had this on his list for a long time, and I was curious why. It seems like it's not a huge task to hand over a laptop to someone else, especially your spouse. And so he said, well, there's a lot of photos on this, on the hard drive, and I need to organize the photos before I can give her this laptop. And my first question was why, right? Why do we need to organize the photos before we give someone the laptop? Like this concept of we need to organize before we do something, right? Before we can make progress on something, we need to organize it. And when I asked that question, he looked at me like maybe I was dumb for a second, but then he pulled back and he said, actually, I don't know, right? I guess the sequence of this doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to organize the photos before I give her the laptop. I could just put all the photos on a thumb drive. They don't need to be organized. and I can give her the laptop, then she has the laptop and I can organize the photos whenever. And I said, fantastic. That's what we want to do, right? We don't want this added complexity, this sense of like organizing before we can move forward. We want to kind of remove the complexity of this task, right? We want to make it simpler to get it towards the finish line, because then organizing the photos, that's actually not probably a very urgent thing. Getting the laptop, that might have been more urgent, and it was being blocked by this like extra complexity. But when we remove that complexity, now, organizing the photos, it's a separate task. It lives over here. Maybe it's a someday maybe task, because who cares? Maybe it doesn't ever need to be organized, right? Maybe we just pop them into Google Photos and let Google magically organize them for us, right? Maybe that needs to be done, maybe it doesn't, but it definitely was adding complexity to the task of giving someone the laptop, right? That's one that shows up. Now, another one that often shows up is around filing. Like, people ask me about, how should I organize my Google Drive? How should I organize my files? What do I need to create the structure first? Like, I want to create this like massive structure, and then I'm going to file things into it. And I often find that that is just the wrong way to go to, it's the wrong order, the wrong sequencing to go about things, right? Because if you create a complex folder structure with subfolders, with all of this stuff, if you create this complex folder structure, what is going to happen is that you are likely going to need to change things, right? It might not work the way that you think it will. And so you essentially plan this folder structure in your head. You get it all in there. It's got folders and subfolders and all of this stuff. And then you start going to add things to it. And the stuff that you need to file doesn't actually neatly fit into the folder structure that you created. And because it has subfolders and subfolders, it's kind of hard to find even the place where you thought that this thing would be. And so we can do this in a different way that has less complexity, that is easier, and that is faster, and that it gets you to kind of the end result sooner, right? And that is that you create the filing structure as you're filing the things. So, for instance, maybe you start out, you have a bank statement. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to create a folder called finance, right? And maybe all you have is bank statements. And so that can just be in the finance folder, and that's fine. But maybe you find another thing and you're like, oh, it's a loan statement. It's different than a bank statement, whatever. So now, great. In finance, you can have a subfolder for loan statements and one for bank statements. That's fine, because you actually have files that need to fit in those. But you're essentially creating the structure as you go so that it doesn't become more complex than is actually needed for you, right? You're creating what makes sense. Now, you might say, why is anyone creating a file structure anymore? Because you can just search, right? And that is totally true. For a lot of us, we don't need to create a file structure for anything anymore, because you can just easily search things in Google, right? In Google Drive, or on your hard drive. Search is so much better than it used to be. But there are people who are like navigators, people who really like to navigate to the thing that works better for them. It fits better into their brain. And so if you're one of those people, you're probably thinking, yeah, I like a folder structure. I like to be able to find the things. And in that case, just build it out as you're doing it, instead of trying to build something really complex first, right? Now, task system, I think I actually talked about this not too long ago, but task over organization is something that, and task complexity, this complexity of where do you find things, this is something that I find really bogs people down. Most people that I work with, well, there's kind of two camps: people who come in with like no system at all, and we're just building it from scratch. And then there's people who come in with an already existing system. It tends to be incredibly organized, like very complex when I work with folks like this. Many, many, many layers of subfolders, many, many different folders. And it's a lot, right? It's a lot. And what I find when people have this kind of over organization of their task systems, this over complexity, is that it makes the system itself very difficult to use. Because you have to now, it takes a while. You got to navigate to the right place to find the right task. You spend time in all these different folders. It's hard to know what we need to do today, etc. And so like when I work with people, I often say, let's start with two categories: work and personal, right? We may never need more categories than that, because we're going to be prioritizing by date, right? So in some ways, it doesn't actually matter where, what matters most is when are we going to do the thing, not what category does it fit into. Now, of course, you may want to have categories for things where it's actually going to be useful, right? So, for instance, I have a category that is, the name of my assistant and a label rather. And things get tagged with that label. That things get tagged with that tag when it relates to her, because that way, when I'm in a meeting with her, it's really easy for me to just click on that tag and I can pull up everything that is assigned to her, right? So I can see everything all in one place. You might have a bunch of different tasks or projects that are all related to some type of meeting that you go to, right? Or your one-on-one with somebody, et cetera. You might want to tag those things the same or have them in a category so that it's easy to pull them up all in one place. But then sometimes people will have a, structure. I'll see it and it'll be like home, personal, kids, and then, each kid and that I start to wonder, like, is that actually useful to you? Like, is there a time where you're going to need to see what are all the tasks that you have related to one of your kids all in one place? Like, what purpose would that be for? When would you be doing that, right? Maybe if you have a good answer, please tell me. I want to know, but I haven't found one in my life when I would need to be able to surface all the tasks that are related to just one of my kids for some reason, right? Or, I don't need to surface all the tasks that are related to buying something or shopping because, I'm going to be doing that at different times, maybe at different stores, et cetera. And so we want to kind of limit this urge to overly organized, to make things more complex than they need to be, because often that extra complexity actually prevents us from doing the thing that we would need to do. So yes, we want fields that are necessary. We need a date field, right? We need to know what it's called, but we don't necessarily need all of these other categories to make something work, especially if we are prioritizing in a date-based method, which is what I teach in my time well spent program and in my coaching program, et cetera, and my course as well. And so if you think about, complexity in your life, if you have resistance to using a tool or a system, or if you're experiencing resistance because you feel like there's too much overhead in something, what I would urge you to do is ask yourself, like, what is the end goal? And does adding extra organization and extra complexity into something, does that actually make your end goal better, right? Does it get you closer? Does it help you get there? If not, consider removing that complexity and seeing if you can get there faster and if you have less resistance to the systems and or the tools that you're using. All right. If you like this kind of content, please give it a like. Let me know. I need feedback here, right? If you want to keep getting this kind of content, you don't want to miss anything, please make sure to subscribe so that it shows up in your feed. And I will see you next time.
Hey man, I'm gonna need you to subscribe right now because only about 14% of the people that are watching are subscribed.